Hi, this is Dr. Aaron Dodini from Axon ADHD. I wanted to walk you through the process that we go through when we're interpreting our ADHD evaluation results. This is just a quick primer to give you some idea about how we use the objective data from the QbCheck test to inform our comprehensive assessment and give us diagnostic certainty so that we can know exactly what we're dealing with, whether it's ADHD or not, what type of ADHD, and then the severity of symptoms relative to other same-sex and age comparison groups. So first thing I'm going to do is pull up and share the screen here so that you can see our QbCheck results. So keep in mind that we have the self-assessment, the subjective data that we look at for depression, anxiety, rejection-sensitive dysphoria, substance use and abuse. And we look at all that as comprehensive data, as well as the self-report measure for ADHD symptoms. So keep in mind, we have the subjective data, the self-report measures for depression, anxiety, ADHD, substance use and abuse, as well as rejection-sensitive dysphoria. So that's the interpersonal mood components of ADHD. So all of that information, that subjective data, is key in helping us to get some sense of severity of symptoms and also how they affect in real life the person that we're interviewing. But the objective data forms the core of the evaluation. The QbCheck is the only FDA-cleared device explicitly designed to measure hyperactivity, impulsivity, and inattention all at the same time. So it is the gold standard for ADHD evaluation, and I believe the most reliable and valid tool on the market today. So we start with recognizing this report is for somebody who's a 33-year-old woman. She was referred by her primary care physician. And the first score we're looking at here is the Total Symptom Score. So this score is a composite. It's made up of all the data we collect while the person is doing the test. And that data is combined into one single score and then compared to a general population. So that's boys and girls, men and women, ages 12 to 60. Now, in this case, the score is 84 out of a possible 100. And that represents a high likelihood of having ADHD-like symptoms. When we look at the normal distribution curve here, we can see that only 7% of the population scores above 50 on this test. And as a result, this score of 84 is we're into around 2 standard deviations from the mean for a comparison group for the total symptom score. So our ballpark measure is telling us, yep, this is likely ADHD, okay? But that's about all it can tell us. The next section over here is the objective measures for specific symptomology. So now we're looking at activity levels, impulsivity levels, and attention levels. We're comparing this woman's score on each of these measures to other women her same age. We do that using standard deviation scores that then get translated into percentile ranks. And this gives us relative severity. So the first thing we looked at was activity levels. In this case, this woman's movement, her score was 1.6 standard deviations from the mean. So she's a bit of a mover and a shaker. She's in the 95th percentile, which effectively means she moved more than 95% of women her age taking this test. We can see the raw data. This is her movement captured in 5-minute increments in comparison to our control group, a woman who does not have ADHD. And what you'll notice in the control group is there's very limited movement. It's very micro movement, tiny little movements, not taking up much space, and it's consistent across the whole 20-minute period. In contrast, our sample patient here has micro movement at the beginning, but then as the test goes on with each successive 5-minute period, there's more and more movement. And that's suggesting that as the test progresses, the person is using movement as a way of creating stimulation in order to be more attentive, to stay awake, frankly, and to be able to endure the test. So this change in movement over time is really what is most important. Most folks are not concerned about hyperactivity, but the data is important for us because it helps us recognize the function of the movement. And in this case, it's clear that the function of the movement is to create stimulation for the purpose of staying more focused. Okay. The next thing we look at is impulsivity. Impulsivity for the case of ADHD is defined as sensitivity and reactivity to stimuli. That can be a sensitivity and reactivity to external stimuli, things we see, hear, taste, touch, or smell. We may also be sensitive and reactive to internal stimuli, like our emotions or our thoughts or even our beliefs. There's also reactivity and sensitivity to interpersonal stimuli, right? The things that go on between us. In this instance, what we're primarily looking at is the person's reactivity to visual stimuli. So as the figure on the screen changes, the patient may actually have a responsiveness to that visual stimuli. And what we're measuring is her knee-jerk reaction to click the space bar and respond even when she's not supposed to. So we call those commission errors. And in this instance, this woman had her score was 2.7 standard deviations from the mean. That means she made more commission errors than 99% of women her age taking this test. Now, what that looks like in our lives is what's probably most important. So because we're not going around through life clicking on space bars, what does impulsivity look like? Well, on one side of the coin is a sensitivity and reactivity to stimuli that might look like distractibility, inattentiveness. It's what I call the squirrel factor, right? So impulsivity can very much look like inattentiveness or distractibility. What's happening is the person is drawn to the thing that is more stimulating, more interesting, more urgent, perhaps, or just in some cases more important to them. Now, sometimes the thing that's not more important, but it's the thing that's most stimulating will be the thing that grabs their attention. On the flip side of the coin is sometimes stimuli can grab someone's attention and then hold it hostage. And in that case, we might see a hyperfocus that's engaged. So in this instance, the person is very often engaged in something, may very well be productive, but it's also where we start to see time blindness show up. So the person's engaged, there's lots of distractions going on. Maybe people are walking around and moms and dads are, yelling at you, hey, we need you to get your room cleaned up or whatever, but they can't see it, they can't hear it. They're really, truly locked in a hyper-focused state. That's a great thing when we're doing the thing we should be doing. It's not so great when we're spending 5 hours doom scrolling the internet for the cutest kitten on the internet. So each of these aspects of impulsivity, whether it's the distracted kind or the hyper-focused kind, it can be a good news or bad news situation depending on the context or the circumstances. What's most challenging for ADHDers is that it's very difficult to control. We often can't predict when we'll be more on the hyper-focused side or the distractible side. And so we may prepare very well for, let's say, an exam, for example, and we're walking into it, we're prepared, we spent a good amount of time studying. We go into the testing center and the kid next to us is chewing their gum too loud. And all of a sudden we're distracted and we can't focus. And what we thought we were ready to do on the test now has become inaccessible. And so we don't perform as well as we might have hoped. So the distractibility or the hyper-focus, depending on the circumstances, may be a positive or a negative in our lives. But it's certainly difficult to not be able to predict or control what side of the coin may be showing up when we flip it, okay? So that can actually lead to anxiety or depression just because we don't have control over these instances. So we might walk into work one day thinking, oh man, I've been crushing it lately, I'm gonna get a raise. Or frankly, an hour later feel like, gosh, I'm likely gonna get fired because I don't seem to be able to get things moving. So that unpredictability actually is a major challenge for ADHD and leads very often to self-criticism, judgments, perfectionism sometimes. So all those things can over time lead to depressive symptoms and anxiety-based symptoms. Now on our inattention scale, we have 3 different factors that we're looking at. The first are the omission errors. These are the times this woman should have clicked the spacebar and responded and just didn't, right? So maybe she forgot the rules, she was looking out the window instead of paying attention, got distracted, or just exhausted through it. Regardless, in this case, her omission error score is 1.5 standard deviations from the mean. She had more omission errors than 93% of women her age. So relative severity here, we see that in this case, the commission error score is 2.7 standard deviations. The omission error score is 1.5. There's only a 6 percentile rank difference, but a full 1.2 standard deviations from the mean difference. So relatively speaking, the impulsivity is really driving the boat here. So these are the symptoms that are probably most profound. And in fact, a lot of times this impulsivity can cause inattentiveness. So for example, while the patient's doing the test, they may be, locked in, clicking, and while they're doing the test, there may be some sound in the hallway. And so they turn their head to locate that sound. That's an impulsive reaction, right? It's a sensitivity to the auditory stimuli. While their head is turned, the figure may have flashed and disappeared. If it was one they should have clicked on, they never even saw it, right? So they're going to miss clicking it. It'll be an omission error, but very much caused by the reactivity to the auditory stimuli. So this is where we see how impulsivity and inattentiveness are very closely linked, and they really can look like each other at different times. In this case, though, we see there is some inattentiveness, but it's a little bit more mild than the impulsivity scores. This score is on the elevated range, we might call that high or even severe. This is more in the moderate range for a woman her age. Reaction time is the average response time. So how quickly on average did the person respond to the stimuli on the screen? And in this case, this woman was significantly slower than her peers. In fact, slower than 99% of her peers. So 2.2 standard deviations. So what that's telling us is perhaps she's being ultra careful, trying not to make mistakes. So she's being a little more slow in the process. Most likely, what's also happening is she's having a very difficult time settling in and clicking around the same time every time. So what we see here in this score is reaction time variation at 3.3 standard deviations. Now we're in the 99.9 kind of range. So very severe, very difficult for her to just settle in and be consistent. So we're going to see in her raw data times when she clicked much, much slower than her usual or even her average, or much faster than her usual. So on one side, we see perhaps a little bit distractibility or that impulsive, reactive, much faster clicks. So in many ways, this score is indicative of both sides of the continuum, inattentiveness and impulsivity. But what it really measures for me is the effort being exerted. This was much more difficult for her than many of her peers, the vast majority of her peers. Right, so the wide range in response times is suggestive of much more effort having to be exerted. It's a more challenging task. Okay, so when we look at the raw data, we'll start with looking at our control group. So in this case, we know that this woman is in her 30s, and our control group is as well. And so the control group is this group of women who are between the ages of 30 and let's say 45. And they are people who are volunteering, right? Either because they want to make a little bit of money volunteering, or they just love science. What we know about this group that's unique from any other group in our control systems is that these women tend to make mistakes, particularly omission errors at the beginning of the test. And we only see that with this control group. Everybody else, they do very, very well, have very few errors. But in this case, we have women who often have jobs, they have families, maybe children at home, they may have some financial pressures going on. What they don't have is time or interest in doing this stupid test. And so we see that. In fact, the algorithms have picked this up, and we recognize that this is actually very often indicative of a woman who does not have ADHD if she's able to right the ship and correct course and do really well. But the first thing we notice in terms of reaction time is everything's nice and tight. Average response time is right around a half a second, about a half-second range. So all of these responses are really close together. Only 4 commission errors. And like we said, a handful of omission errors in the beginning, and then she settles in and she does fine. And then towards the end, it might be a little bit harder. Very little movement and virtually no change in movement over the course of the 20 minutes. In our sample case here, our sample patient, what we have in reaction time is probably an average response time of a little more than a second, in this really wide range in response times. And so what we see is a lot of effort, difficulty staying focused, staying engaged, a trend towards going really fast, and then it gets slower, 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 slower. And then she kind of snaps back into an attentive state. Then it gets harder and she's slower again. And then she snaps back into an attentive state, or in this case, impulsive state. We see all these commission errors, and many of which are fast, really fast responses. So very truly stimulus response here. But sometimes we have times when she's like, I don't know, was that a blue square? I don't want to miss it, so I'll click it. We see consistent pattern of omission errors throughout the test. So despite the fact that she's often clicking when she shouldn't, there are still times when she's just missing them. It doesn't start until about the 2.5 minute mark though. She does really quite well for that first 2.5 minutes. She just can't sustain it. And so that's also an indicator of ADHD, is that they can do the work and then they can't. And then they check in and they can do it a little bit better and then they can't. So the back and forth of omission errors and commission errors is also very indicative of that ADHD pattern. In many cases, it's because there's a hyper focus on one of the rules over another set of the rules, right? And so in this case, we're seeing, I don't want to miss these, I'm going to click when in doubt. But then she sort of settles in and a lot less impulsivity for this 5-minute stretch. Overall, this is a perfect example of a combined type ADHD where we have very clear indications when compared to a general population of an elevated score. And then when we look at these specific measures, we see relatively elevated, moderately high score for activity, a more intense or high level of severity of impulsivity that's going on in the 99th percentile, extremely high score for reaction time variation. This woman is working her tail off. And then more moderate scores here for the omission errors. So overall, relative to women her age, it's high to severe level of severity of ADHD symptomology compared to other women her age. Now, one of the things I want to point out is that in this specific example, our subjective measures were also elevated for depression, anxiety, and rejection sensitive dysphoria. So her scores were in the elevated, moderately high to high range for depression and anxiety. She's also on an SSRI. So what that's telling us is that the depression and anxiety is not responding particularly well to the medication. She's been on and off of a variety of different SSRIs throughout her life. The current prescription for Zoloft, her anxiety is a little bit better, she reports, but she's still been struggling. So when we see a situation like this, we see somebody who's clearly gotten, she's been successful. She was successful in high school, did very well in college, went on to law school. As she became an attorney, things started getting harder. She started feeling a lot more difficulty making that transition from academic world into professional world. And in this case, we suspect that she is somebody who has had ADHD her whole life, but has had great coping skills, high IQ, willingness to work harder, and in many ways, a high pain threshold. So she's only coming into this assessment in her 30s in part because she was willing to work as hard as she had to, and she was able to. She had the high IQ and she could do it. But as she transitioned into a professional life, it became much more complicated. There were fewer structures in place to help support her, and all of the different schema that she might have used all through her academic life really don't function the same way for her professional life. So she's somebody who has felt like she was having to work harder, that she wasn't as smart as she thought. Even though she had accomplished a lot, she knew she had to work a lot harder. She was frankly exhausted through the process. So in this situation, we suspect that once we treat the ADHD as the underlying cause of her variable function, her functioning levels and inability to maintain them is really what has caused her to become despondent, to be a little more isolated, to be frustrated. She's working really long hours, losing contact with friends and family, doesn't have time to exercise, her sleep has gotten pretty messed up. And so it's kind of a perfect storm for her. And so we see the depression and anxiety as a result of the untreated ADHD. So in this instance, we would recommend a stimulant to treat the ADHD symptoms as primary. And we probably wouldn't recommend a change to the SSRI until we start to see symptoms for the ADHD start to abate. And if our prognosis is accurate here, we're going to start to see an abatement of some of the depression and anxiety symptoms as well, because she'll have more predictability. The medicine's helping her stay focused a little bit more effectively, have that energy come up a little bit more, and in many cases, a brighter mood as a result also. So if after about a month or two of using the stimulant, if we continue to see elevated scores for depression and anxiety, that's when we would start to think, well, maybe we need to change that medication, either increase the dose or maybe go to a different medication. But in this instance, we actually expect to see a pretty significant drop in depression and anxiety symptomology as a result of treating this acute ADHD. So this will give you a little bit of an idea of what we're looking at for the data, how we interpret this data. It gives us very clear diagnostic measures that can also inform our treatment program. So whether we're working with the patient or we're working with the patient's primary care provider or psychiatrist, the data offers real clarity and can give us confidence that how we're going to address the symptoms is accurate and most effective. We can also retest, give the exact same measure while the person is on their dose of the stimulant. And that gives us an idea of how effective that medication is working. If we were to see, in this case, for example, a drop to, let's say, 1 standard deviation or 0.9 standard deviations in the movement, perhaps we get all the way down to 1.5 standard deviations for impulsivity, and we see kind of a general trend towards improvement of these scores, that's really good. We can dial it in, maybe do a little bit more to get us to an even better position. But sometimes we're also content that the functional difference in life is so significant that just getting down to 1 standard deviation scores is a life-changing proposition for them. And so sometimes it's helpful to know that while we might be able to increase the dose, we've gotten a functional benefit that's so significant that we don't necessarily need to go up to a higher dose to get somebody down to, a 0 score, which would be kind of that range of average at the 50th percentile. We often would suggest that would be too much medicine, and we would think that maybe just getting somebody down to 1 or even 0.9 standard deviation scores would be sufficient and present a really huge functional improvement. So, well, thank you for spending some time with us. I'd love to answer any questions you might have. So please feel free to reach out to us either through our email or through our website, which is axonadhd.com. And happy to answer any questions you might have, whether you're a patient or a provider or an educational institution trying to learn how you can support your students more effectively. Happy to be a resource for you. Thanks and have a great day.